The coffee smelled wrong. Not burnt, not stale, wrong. A sharp bitterness threaded through the steam. Faint but unmistakable, like crushed almonds hidden in sugar. My stomach tightened. Alexander set the cup in front of me with that practiced half-smile, the one he used in court and at home when he wanted me quiet. "Drink before it gets cold," he said. His mother, Eleanor, was already seated across the table, tapping her spoon with impatience. Her eyes, always hunting for fault, flicked from me to the cup. I hesitated. Then, with fingers that barely trembled, I switched the mugs. 20 minutes later, Eleanor's laughter stopped. Mornings in our house were a performance. The stage was a polished kitchen with marble counters Eleanor insisted we invest in when Alexander's promotion came through. My role was simple: make it all look effortless. Coffee brewing, toast buttered, fruit sliced neatly into bowls. The house looked perfect because I stayed up late polishing it, not because Alexander cared. But that morning, standing in my silk robe, I noticed how quiet everything felt. No birds outside the window. No traffic hum. Just the tick of the wall clock and the smell of coffee I didn't trust. I had once loved mornings. In law school, they meant strong coffee, the buzz of ambition, the thrill of heading into class early while the city still yawned awake. Back then, success smelled like ink on textbooks and highlighters bleeding neon across pages. I had carried that same hunger into my career, and at 34, I had carved my place in the firm. Long hours, steady wins, no shortcuts. My name was finally on the short list for managing partner, a position that meant recognition, stability, and power I had earned. But in my own kitchen, that power vanished. "Anna, the toast is burning again," Eleanor snapped, wrinkling her nose. Her voice was sharp enough to slice the air. She always arrived uninvited, claiming she wanted to help out. What she really did was comment on the dust on the shelves, the wrinkles in my shirts, the way I arranged the silverware. Every flaw became a headline in her daily critique. Alexander never defended me. He just sat at the table, scrolling his phone, adjusting his tie, occasionally murmuring, "Mother's only trying to help." That morning, when he set the coffee before me, I watched his hands. Steady. Too steady. I had grown used to Eleanor's scorn. What I hadn't grown used to was Alexander's silence. Silence when Eleanor called me ungrateful. Silence when she raised her glass to his unmatched brilliance, in front of our friends, conveniently forgetting my victories. Silence when I worked until midnight, and he still suggested maybe I wasn't partner material, because I lacked the right polish. It wasn't always this way. Once he had admired my fire. In our first year of marriage, he would wait up with me while I drafted briefs, bringing me snacks and rubbing my shoulders. "You'll outshine me one day," he had said, smiling in a way that made me believe him. But somewhere along the line, admiration soured into envy. My victories became his irritations. And with Eleanor whispering poison in his ear, "A wife should know her place. Men don't like women who compete," I started to feel like an intruder in my own life. Still at work, I was Anna Bennett. Sharp, unflinching, reliable. My colleagues trusted me. Clients remembered my name. I knew statutes and precedents the way some people knew song lyrics. In the courtroom, I was unshakable. But in that kitchen, with Eleanor watching and Alexander silently pulling the strings, I felt like a guest, tolerated, not cherished. And maybe that's why I noticed the smell in the coffee, because for months, something had been wrong. The fatigue that clung to me no matter how much I slept. The dizzy spells, the pounding headaches I chalked up to stress. Eleanor sneering that I was fragile while Alexander suggested maybe I needed a break from work. But I wasn't fragile. And I didn't need a break. I needed the truth. That morning, truth smelled like bitter almonds. I used to think betrayal arrived in one crushing blow. A slammed door. A confession blurted in anger. A single moment you could point to and say there. That's when it all broke. But real betrayal was slower. It slipped under the door like smoke, filling the air before you realized you were choking. It began with whispers of doubt. "You're looking pale, Anna," Eleanor would remark, her lips curling around the words as if she enjoyed the taste. "Are you eating properly? Women who work too much always neglect themselves." Alexander would glance at me, then back at his mother. "She pushes too hard. Always has." His voice carried a strange mix of pride and annoyance, as though my ambition was both admirable and inconvenient. I ignored them. At first, the law firm had become my sanctuary. Inside its high glass walls, I wasn't someone's daughter-in-law, someone's too ambitious wife. I was simply Anna Bennett, attorney, advocate, competitor. I lived for the rush of a well-argued motion, the quiet respect in a judge's nod, the gratitude of a client whose future I had helped save. Still, fatigue began shadowing me. I'd wake with a sour taste in my mouth, my head pounding as though I had been drinking, though I hadn't. My hands sometimes trembled when I held a pen. Coffee, I thought. Too much coffee. Stress, perhaps. See? She's run down. Eleanor crowed one evening when I stumbled into the kitchen after a 14-hour day. Women weren't built for this. I remember Alexander's hand on my back. A gentle touch, yet something about it felt rehearsed. Maybe Mother's right, he murmured. You should slow down. Slow down? I was on the cusp of everything I'd worked for. The partners were deliberating their choice for the promotion, and my name had been whispered more than once in hushed corridors. Slowing down wasn't an option. But the body doesn't lie. The dizzy spells grew sharper. The nausea, unpredictable. One morning, after downing the coffee Alexander made for me, I nearly collapsed at the subway entrance. The world spun, my chest tightened, and strangers' faces blurred around me as I clung to the railing. By the time I staggered into the office, I was clammy and shaking. My colleague, Sarah Whitman, touched my forehead. Anna, you're burning up. You need a doctor. I brushed it off with a laugh. Just stress. Court today. I'll be fine. But later that night, I sat alone in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. Hollow eyes. Skin sallow. My hand rested against the porcelain sink, and I whispered aloud the question I'd buried. What if something's wrong with me? And then came the almond smell. It was faint, but once I noticed, I couldn't unsmell it. Not every day, not every cup, but often enough. That bitter edge beneath the warmth. One night, after Eleanor had left and Alexander was asleep, I searched the kitchen. I checked the cabinets, the coffee tin, even the trash. Nothing obvious. Still, suspicion planted itself deep in my chest. The next morning, I tested him. I forgot my coffee on the counter and poured myself a fresh cup instead. He frowned but said nothing. That entire day at the office, I felt almost normal. No dizziness, no nausea. It wasn't proof, but it was a seed. The betrayal finally crystallized one evening in late November. I had been working on a deposition late into the night, my laptop glowing against the kitchen darkness. Alexander came in quietly, carrying 2 mugs. For you, he said, sliding one toward me. I watched him take a sip of his own. My hands curled around the warm ceramic. But something in his eyes stopped me, the way he waited. Not lovingly, not idly. Waiting, like a man watching a coin he had flipped in the air. I didn't drink. Later, after he went to bed, I poured the coffee into the sink. A slick, bitter residue clung to the cup's edge. That was the night I knew. I didn't yet understand why. I didn't yet see the shape of the ambition that had twisted him into this. But I knew the man I had married, the man I had once believed in, was poisoning me. And Eleanor, whether she knew it or not, was part of it. Her scorn kept me doubting myself. Her words kept me small. Her presence gave him cover. They had both been feeding me poison. One with words, the other with something far deadlier. The morning of the switch began like any other, which was perhaps the cruelest part. Betrayal hides best inside routine. I woke to the sound of Eleanor's voice drifting up the stairs. You'll spoil her if you keep doing everything for her, Alexander. A wife should serve her husband, not the other way around. Her words carried the smug confidence of someone who had never been challenged. I lay there a moment, staring at the ceiling, my stomach already knotting. The clock read 6:17. Too early for her, too early for me, too early for the venom that awaited downstairs. I dressed carefully, my navy blouse crisp, hair pinned neatly back. Court later that morning. I needed composure, armor. But armor felt thin when every day began in enemy territory. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee. The counter gleamed, as though scrubbed for inspection. Alexander stood by the pot, pouring into mugs. Eleanor sat at the table, already critiquing the fruit bowl. Too many bananas, she muttered. They rot too quickly. Wasteful. I offered no reply. Silence was safer. Alexander turned, placing a mug before me. Here you go, he said. His voice was even, almost cheerful, but again too careful. He slid the cup close to my hand. The smell rose instantly. Almond. Sharp, faint, unmistakable. My pulse hammered in my ears. Thank you, I murmured, wrapping my hands around the mug. My palms were damp. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. You look pale again. Honestly, Anna, if you can't even manage your health, how do you expect to manage a law firm? Her words landed like stones, one after another. I had heard variations of them countless times. You're not strong enough. Not smart enough. Not suitable for real responsibility. Each one chipped away at the walls I had built to protect myself. I glanced at Alexander, hoping, foolishly maybe, for a flicker of defense, some trace of the man who once believed in me. But he only stirred his coffee slowly, watching the liquid swirl. Something in me snapped. It wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, precise, like glass cracking under pressure. I thought of the months of sickness. The residue at the bottom of the mug. The way he watched me drink. The way Eleanor mocked me while he let her words stand. My hand trembled, but not from weakness. Not anymore. When Eleanor leaned over to adjust the sugar jar, I shifted the cups. Smooth. Simple. Barely a sound. Alexander didn't notice. Neither did she. The bitter smell now rose from the mug in front of Eleanor. She lifted it with her usual disdain, sipping as though the world owed her comfort. Minutes passed. She continued her tirade, complaining about neighbors, about the cost of electricity, about the softness of bread these days. Alexander nodded absently, his eyes occasionally darting to me. I didn't drink. I only held the mug, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out her voice. And then it happened. Her words slowed. She pressed a hand to her throat. Strange taste, she muttered, frowning. Bitter. Alexander looked up sharply. His spoon clinked against the mug. Eleanor's face tightened, her complexion paling. She coughed, once then again more violently. What's wrong? Alexander asked quickly, standing. His voice was pitched higher, strained. She wheezed, clutching her stomach. The chair scraped against the tile as she tried to rise. I sat frozen. My breath caught. My fingers tightened around the mug. For months, I had been gaslit into believing my body was failing, that I was too weak, too fragile. For months, I had doubted myself. And now, in the space of 20 minutes, the truth played out before me. Eleanor staggered. The coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering against the floor. Alexander rushed to her side, panic flooding his face. Mother! Mother, stay with me. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate. My pulse thundered, but my voice, when it emerged, was steady. She drank my coffee. His head snapped toward me, eyes wild. For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. A silence heavier than any insult Eleanor had ever thrown at me. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I only watched. Watched the man who had sworn to love me cradle his mother. The woman who had despised me, as realization flickered in his eyes. The poison had never been meant for her. Sleep abandoned me that night. I lay in the dark, sheets twisted around my legs, staring at the ceiling. Every sound in the house felt magnified. The tick of the hallway clock, the creak of pipes, Alexander's uneven breathing beside me. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind refused to rest. It replayed the morning on an endless loop. Eleanor sipping the poisoned coffee, her face tightening, the cup shattering against the floor. Alexander's panic, his desperate voice calling for help. And my own stillness. My refusal to move. I hadn't poisoned her. But I hadn't saved her either. For months, I had been swallowing doubt with every sip of coffee. I had let Alexander convince me I was fragile, that my ambition was dangerous, that my body was failing me. Eleanor's words had carved trenches in my confidence, and I had let them. Together, they had almost erased me. But that morning, I had acted. Quietly. Deliberately. I had taken control of the script. The thought both terrified and steadied me. At 3 a.m., I rose, pacing barefoot across the hardwood floor. The house felt cavernous, hostile. Shadows stretched long in the corners. I paused at the kitchen doorway, staring at the faint stain where Eleanor's coffee had spilled. The tiles gleamed from Alexander's frantic scrubbing, but I could still see it, the outline of betrayal exposed. A part of me trembled with guilt. She was cruel, yes, but she hadn't brewed the poison. She hadn't watched me weaken day after day. That was Alexander. Yet without her constant chorus of disdain, would I have doubted myself enough to miss the signs? They had been partners in my undoing. I gripped the counter, nails digging into the smooth surface. For so long, I had been playing defense, enduring the barbs, excusing the silences, rationalizing the sickness. But now I saw the pattern clearly: gaslighting, control, erasure. He hadn't just wanted me quiet. He wanted me gone. The promotion loomed like a cruel joke. My name on the shortlist, his smile just a fraction too thin whenever colleagues mentioned it. If I were out of the way, he could rise unobstructed, bathed in sympathy, perhaps even inheriting my clients. It wasn't only about ambition. It was about ownership. He couldn't bear me surpassing him. That realization lit something inside me. A slow, smoldering fire. I poured myself a glass of water, the tremor in my hand barely visible now. I drank deeply, feeling the cool liquid wash away the dryness in my throat. When I set the glass down, I whispered aloud, "No more." The words startled me. Small, sharp, final. I wasn't sure yet what they meant. No more silence? No more submission? No more marriage? Perhaps all of it. But I knew one thing with clarity. I would not be erased. The next days blurred together in fragments. Eleanor hospitalized, Alexander frantic, his polished composure cracked. He spent hours on the phone with doctors, lawyers, anyone who would listen. I watched him from a distance, noting the desperation in his eyes, the way his hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking. He knew. He knew I knew. We danced around it in silence. He continued making coffee, offering it with that same careful smile, though I never touched it again. I brewed my own in the office, in the firm's humming break room where colleagues chatted over bagels and laughter drowned out suspicion. But at night, I returned to the silence of our house, where shadows clung to corners and truth pressed against the walls. Sleep never came easily. I walked the hallways, thoughts circling like restless birds. I replayed memories of our marriage, his early admiration, his gentle encouragement, the way he once looked at me as though I were unstoppable. I wanted to believe that man had existed. But now, I saw only the cracks that had always been there, widened by envy, fed by Eleanor's venom. One night, near dawn, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant, then began to type. Not legal briefs this time, not deposition notes. Just truths. Every symptom, every suspicion, every detail of the morning switch. My private record. The words poured out, steady and relentless. When I finished, pages stared back at me, undeniable evidence of my journey from confusion to clarity. Reading them, I felt something I hadn't in months: power. It wasn't a plan yet, but it was a beginning. The first rule of strategy was one I knew well from court. Never move before you've gathered your evidence. For weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I argued motions, cross-examined witnesses, and kept my place at the firm steady. By night, I became my own investigator. I started small, quiet, careful. The document I'd typed in the early hours grew into a log, each entry marked with dates, symptoms, smells. Every morning Alexander brewed coffee, I noted it. Every time I skipped the cup and felt better, I wrote that too. I even recorded the bitter residue I sometimes scraped from the bottom of mugs. Evidence. Truth. Still, truth without proof was fragile. I needed more. One Saturday when Alexander left for the gym, I searched the kitchen. My hands shook as I opened cabinets, drawers, the spice rack. Behind a row of teas Eleanor had brought from some overpriced shop, I found it. A small amber vial, half empty, its cap sticky. The label had been torn off. My stomach turned. I wrapped it in a paper towel, slipped it into my handbag, and later tucked it into my desk drawer at work. Just touching it felt dangerous, as though the poison might seep through the glass. That night, Alexander kissed me on the cheek, asked about my deposition, and I smiled, steady as stone. But courage is never constant. Some nights I doubted myself. What if I was wrong? What if the vial was harmless, just some supplement or flavoring? What if the sickness had been in my mind all along, just as they'd said? Those thoughts were poison of their own. It was Sarah Whitman who unknowingly steadied me. She was my colleague, friend, sometimes rival, sharp-tongued but loyal. One late evening, as we packed up after court, she studied me with narrowed eyes. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" I asked cautiously. "Stronger. Like you stopped apologizing for breathing." The word startled me. My throat tightened. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. I almost told her everything. Almost. But fear clamped down. What if she didn't believe me? What if word reached the firm, and I was painted as unstable? The law had sharp edges. Even whispers could slice reputations. So instead, I just smiled faintly and said, "Maybe I finally got some rest." Still, her words lingered. They reminded me that the change was visible. My quiet fire wasn't just internal. The real test came 2 weeks later, when Alexander invited me to dinner at an upscale restaurant. He ordered for me, as he sometimes did, slipping easily into that role of controlled charm. "You've been distracted lately," he said, swirling wine in his glass. "Everything all right?" My chest tightened. The question was both casual and loaded. "I'm fine," I replied. He tilted his head, studying me. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Would I?" "Once yes. Now never." The food arrived. Salmon for me, steak for him. He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "You know, Anna, I've always wanted the best for you." I held his gaze. My smile didn't reach my eyes. "I know." That night, I wrote another entry in my log. Alexander attempting reassurance. Possible manipulation. Maintain caution. But strategy wasn't just about defense. At some point, I had to move. I began quietly consulting a toxicologist. Not officially. That would risk exposure. But casually, framed as hypothetical questions over coffee breaks and networking events. I asked about symptoms, about bitter-almond scents, about compounds that left residue in mugs. Each answer was another piece sliding into place. The vial, I learned, likely contained cyanide derivatives. Slow doses could mimic illness, leaving doctors puzzled. The knowledge chilled me, but it also armed me. I contacted a private lab discreetly, using a client pretext. I sent the vial in for testing. Waiting for results stretched my patience thin, but I filled the time by preparing. I copied my log, scanned it to secure drives, emailed it to an encrypted account only I could access. If Alexander suspected, he didn't show it. He moved through the days with polished ease, visiting Eleanor in the hospital, updating friends on her mysterious illness. To others, he was the devoted son and supportive husband. But at night, I caught flickers in his expression, tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted to my untouched coffee mug, the too careful questions. He knew his plan was unraveling. The setback came unexpectedly. The lab called. The vial was contaminated, results inconclusive. My strongest piece of physical evidence dissolved into uncertainty. For hours, I sat at my desk, staring at the report. Rage burned in my throat. Months of sickness, of fear, of doubt. And now the proof slipped through my fingers. I considered giving up. Perhaps I could leave quietly, file for divorce, walk away. Survival, not justice. But the thought sickened me more than the poison ever had. Walking away would mean he kept the story. He would remain the charming husband, the wronged man with a mysteriously ill wife. Eleanor would continue whispering about my fragility, my failures. And I would vanish into silence. No. The setback forced me to pivot. I didn't need a vial. I had patterns. I had behavior. I had motive. And as a lawyer, I knew motive could be as damning as physical evidence when presented in the right light. So I kept building. Quietly, meticulously. I requested copies of my medical visits, subtle notes about fatigue and nausea. I documented Eleanor's remarks. I recorded Alexander's words when I could. The edge of impatience in his voice, the silence's heavy as chains. Every piece became a brick in the case I was building, not just for court, but for myself. Because the deeper truth was this: my fight wasn't only against Alexander. It was against every voice that had told me I was too fragile, too ambitious, too much. And for the first time, I felt ready to fight. The partners' dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Crystal glasses, polished cutlery, laughter echoing through the vaulted dining room of the firm's private hall. I wore a black dress, understated but sharp, my hair sleek, my smile practiced. To everyone else, I was Anna Bennett, contender for managing partner, calm and composed. But beneath the calm, my heart pounded like a war drum. Tonight, I wasn't just here to secure a promotion. Tonight, the truth would finally have a stage. Alexander arrived at my side, immaculate as always. His hand rested lightly on my back as he introduced me to colleagues, his voice honeyed. My wife Anna, brilliant as ever. I let him play his part. The devoted husband, the proud supporter, the man who had brewed poison with the same hands that now guided me through the room. The first course arrived, chatter filled the air, and wine flowed. I waited. Timing mattered. Exposure meant nothing without witnesses. When the managing partner, Evelyn Carter, raised her glass to toast the firm's future, I rose too. My knees trembled, but my voice when it emerged was steady. Before we celebrate the future, I said, I think there's something the partners deserve to hear. The room quieted. Eyes turned toward me. Alexander stiffened beside me, his smile frozen. Anna. I lifted a hand, silencing him. For months, I've been unwell. Fatigue, dizziness, nausea. Doctors puzzled, friends concerned. And yet at home, I was told I was fragile, that I was imagining things. Murmurs rippled across the table. Evelyn leaned forward, brows knitted. I reached into my handbag and withdrew a slim folder. Not dramatic, not clumsy, precise. I placed it on the table, the sound sharp against the linen. This, I continued, is a record I've kept. Dates, symptoms, the circumstances surrounding them. It shows a pattern that points to deliberate poisoning. Gasps rose. Silverware clattered. Alexander laughed, too quickly, too loudly. Poisoning? Anna, this is absurd. But I turned to him then, locking eyes. For the first time, I let my fury surface. Not shouted, not wild. Controlled, cutting. Absurd? The bitter almond smell in my coffee. The residue in the mugs. The vial I found hidden in our kitchen. The timing. Always worse after you brewed the drinks. Do you think I don't notice the way you watched me, waiting? His face drained of color. The silence in the room thickened, broken only by the clink of a glass as someone set it down too hard. I pressed on. You wanted me out of the way. Out of the firm. Out of life itself. So you could rise higher, freer, unchallenged. And your mother. My voice sharpened. Your mother played her part. Gaslighting me, cutting me down, convincing me I was weak. Evelyn's voice finally cut through. Anna, are you saying Alexander attempted? Yes, I said clearly. And I can prove it. If not with chemical residue, then with motive, pattern, and testimony. I've consulted specialists. I've documented every incident. I was not imagining it. I was being erased. The weight of my words hung heavy. Alexander's mask cracked. Anger flickered, raw and unpolished. You think they'll believe you? You're hysterical. Everyone knows you push too hard. No, my voice sliced through his. Calm, cold. Everyone used to think that. Not anymore. I turned to the partners, to colleagues who had seen my exhaustion, my faltering steps into court, my struggle to smile through pain. They told me I was fragile. But I am not fragile. I am here. And I am telling you the truth. Silence stretched. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice steady. Anna, we will review this immediately. And Alexander, perhaps you should excuse yourself. His chair scraped back, his breath ragged. He looked at me one last time, disbelief and fury warring in his eyes. But the performance was over. The stage belonged to me. As he left, whispers filled the room. Shock, sympathy, outrage. I stood, spine straight, hands steady on the folder. For the first time in months, I wasn't doubting myself. The truth was no longer mine alone. It was out, undeniable, echoing in the air between crystal glasses and linen-draped tables. And the fallout had only begun. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not empty, more like the silence after a storm, when the air is heavy and the ground still wet, but the sky begins to clear. Alexander moved out within a week. Not voluntarily. Evelyn had confronted him directly, the other partners behind her, their disappointment sharp as a verdict. Until these allegations are fully reviewed, she'd said coldly, your presence here compromises the firm. His fury was barely contained. He muttered about slander, about my instability, but no one rushed to his defense. His mask had cracked too far. They had seen it. Eleanor, meanwhile, remained in the hospital. The poison had weakened her, though she would recover. I visited once, not out of duty but out of curiosity, perhaps even closure. She lay propped against white pillows, her hair thinner, her voice softer. When she saw me, her lips curled faintly. You always wanted to see me brought low, didn't you? I didn't flinch. No. I wanted to see the truth. She turned her head, closing her eyes. You're stronger than I thought. It wasn't apology. Not quite. But it was the closest she would ever come. I left without looking back. At home the air felt different. No more Alexander's careful brewing of coffee, no more Eleanor's constant commentary. Just me, my own footsteps, my own breath. At first, the emptiness rattled me. I had grown so used to being watched, measured, diminished, that solitude felt foreign. But gradually, I began to inhabit the silence. I rearranged the kitchen, moved the mugs to a new shelf, bought a new coffee pot, one that hissed and sputtered in the mornings like a living thing. The first time I brewed a cup for myself, the smell filled the room, rich, clean, untainted. I held it in both hands, inhaled deeply, and felt tears prick my eyes. Not from weakness. From relief. Work shifted too. Evelyn called me into her office one afternoon, her voice warm but firm. Anna, we've reviewed your documentation. We believe you. And more importantly, we've seen your resilience. That's what leadership requires. Congratulations. The promotion letter lay on her desk, heavy with embossed lettering. Managing partner. My name, not his. I walked out of her office with the document clutched in my hand, my legs trembling, my chest tight. Not from fear this time. From victory. Yet it wasn't the title that mattered most. It was the recognition, not just by the firm, but by myself. For months I had doubted my strength, questioned my sanity. Now I knew better. The nights grew easier. I still woke sometimes, heart racing, memories clawing at me. But instead of pacing hallways, I sat at my desk, adding to my document. Not evidence now, but reflections. My story. The quiet truth of a woman who refused to vanish. One Saturday, Sarah dropped by with a bottle of wine. She plopped onto my couch, kicked off her shoes and eyed me. You're different again, she said. I laughed softly. Good different. The best kind, she replied. Like you finally believe what the rest of us always knew. You're unbreakable. Her words settled over me like a blanket. Warm. Comforting. True. I thought about Alexander sometimes. What he was plotting now. What excuses he spun to friends. What stories he told himself at night. But the thought no longer burned. It barely registered. He had lost the one thing he craved most. Control. And Eleanor? She would live. But her power over me had ended. Her scorn echoed only in memory now, no longer in my kitchen. In the quiet of my home, I discovered something unexpected. Peace. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just peace. The sound of the kettle whistling. The soft creak of the wooden floor. The way morning sunlight slanted through the blinds. The details I had once clung to for survival now felt like gifts. I wasn't fragile. I wasn't hysterical. I wasn't erased. I was here. And I was free. Some mornings I still pause before drinking my coffee. It's instinct now, a brief hesitation, a flicker of memory, before I lift the cup to my lips. But the fear no longer owns me. It's simply a reminder, like a scar that tells you where you've been and how far you've come. I think about that day often, the smell of bitter almonds in the air, the quick decision that changed everything. For so long, I believed survival meant silence. Endurance. Swallowing what was given, even when it burned. But survival, I've learned, is not the same as living. Living requires choice. When I chose to switch those cups, I wasn't seeking revenge. Not really. I was reaching for proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining the shadows around me. Proof that my instincts were real. Proof that I mattered enough to fight for. The fallout was messy, painful, exhausting. Betrayal leaves stains you can't scrub out in a single season. But it also clears space. And in that space, I found myself again. Now, as I walk into the office each morning, my name on the plaque, my decisions shaping the future, I feel a steadiness I never had before. Not arrogance. Not triumph. Just a quiet knowing. I survived what was meant to break me. And I rose anyway. Sometimes, late at night, I stand at my window and watch the city lights flicker. Each one a story, a life, a secret battle unfolding behind glass. I wonder how many women sit in kitchens, doubting themselves, shrinking under someone else's voice. I want to tell them this. You are not invisible. You are not small. And the truth, however terrifying, is worth fighting for. Because truth has a way of breaking locks. It opens doors you didn't think you could step through. It turns silence into speech, shadows into clarity. The last sip of coffee is always the strongest, the richest. And as I drain my cup, I know this much. I am no longer afraid of the bitterness. I have tasted worse. And I am still here,